Hey there, I'm Steve, and welcome to Jamsin Entertainment. And welcome to the conversation. Just before we get started, there are many ways you can help. You can like and subscribe so you never miss a conversation. But most importantly, please share this video. Get the word out there as a community, and we can talk about all the things that we love. Today on Throwback Thursday, we're looking at Star Wars Episode 2, The Attack of the Clones. Going forward with both franchises, I will give very small spoilers to the previous film, only for context purposes. Just want to put that out there. Well, the one I have in mind kinda is if you still haven't watched Phantom Menace, but for the most part they're not going to be huge spoilers for the previous film. This takes place 10 years after the Phantom Menace. Not release wise, Lucas had a 3-year gap between each of his movies when he was directing and in charge of Star Wars. Opens up with now Senator Amidala landing in Coruscant to fulfill her duty, but she's attacked. There's an assassination attempt on her, and that's part of the plot in this movie. The Viceroy is still very upset with how things went for them 10 years ago. But it's more involved than that. Since the Viceroy were in league with the Sith, they still are to an extent, but they're no longer the sub-villain. They're kind of like a side villain now. Like, they don't really do anything except just be on the bad side. No, with this, we're introduced to new characters on both sides. So in addition to the cast of the first movie, we also have Hayden Christensen is now Anakin Skywalker. Christopher Lee is playing Count Dooku. Tamara Morrison plays Jango Fett. Jimmy Smits is Senator Bail Organa. Jack Thompson is Klieg Lars. I always thought it was Cleve, so I just mispronouncing it and mishearing it for 20 years. Leanna Walsman as Zam Wezel. Jay Lagaya, sorry for mispronouncing that, as Captain Typho. Joel Egerton is Owen Lars. Daniel Logan as Boba Fett. And Bonnie PSA, I'm sorry for mispronouncing that as well, as Beru. So Anakin was recasted not because of what happened with Jake Lloyd, but because Anakin is supposed to be much older. Like I said, it's 10 years after the Phantom Menace. And 3 years isn't really enough for Jake Lloyd to grow up and be the Anakin that we needed. But people complain about Hayden Christensen's performance in this movie. Again, for a while I was on that same hate train, and I'm very sorry. I've again matured. I've watched a lot of content talked about this, and watching it myself, especially this time around, I agree with what I've consumed about this particular movie, and I come up with some of my own ideas. So like I mentioned in the first review, a lot of the bad acting, people say it's just the actors or Lucas's direction or both, but when you really look at this performance, think back to when you were a teenager, and now take you as a teenager. Most teenagers are very awkward because you're discovering who you are. Now, imagine that you're paired up with an older person, someone that's like a father or even a brother figure, and the only view you have of the world is through the lens of the Jedi. You didn't really interact with people before because you only had Watto and your mother. You were a slave then, but you had feelings for this one girl. Now it's 10 years later, Anakin is still much a teenager in here, so he still has the hormones going on wildly. He's never really spoken to a girl before, let alone flirt with them. So yes, the dialogue is cringy. At least I remember saying some really cringy things when I was a teenager, because I mean, I didn't know how to talk to girls then. I still largely don't know how to talk to women now. So it's something that you work on. I totally believe this to be a teenager that's trying to figure the world out, and he wants to be independent. You can definitely see him rebelling against Obi-Wan, against the Council, against life in general. People also point out that he's very whiny. Well, they say the same thing about Luke in the first Star Wars movie. What I mean is that it came out in 77, but chronologically it's the 4th episode. They're both teenagers. I was a whiny teenager. I'm sure some of you were whiny teenagers. There's also been complaints about Natalie Portman's performance in this. I'm fine with it. I totally believe that she responds to what Anakin, Hayden Christensen, is saying. She is more mature than he is. And grant you, there's like a 9-year difference between, so obviously. So she doesn't really have as cringeworthy as dialogue. No, Lucas waits for the 3rd movie to do that. So that's how I see Hayden Christensen's performance. He's just an awkward teenager where his only social interaction are his missions as a Padawan with Obi-Wan. This is how I would expect a teenager to behave around a woman, because she is a a woman that he feels he's fallen in love with. Teenage years, love and lust is very mixed. It's easy to confuse the two when you're that young. Okay, back to the plot. With Padme's life being in danger, there's a meeting about it that she attends with the Jedi and other senators and Chancellor Palpatine. And there's a moment in here where Yoda gives a glare to Palpatine. And it's because he suggests that the Jedi protect Padme, which isn't too out of the ordinary, but he gives Palpatine this glare as like, you're stepping dangerously close to our territory. Like, this is where we make decisions, not necessarily you. But it is a suggestion, and it's probably why Yoda doesn't say anything. And the Jedi assigned are Obi-Wan and Anakin. While they're protecting her, she gets attacked again. And there's a chase. And remember how I talked about force speed? How it would be very useful? Well, the chase goes from in the air, both Obi-Wan grabbing hold of the droid that drops off the poisonous centipedes to kill Padme, but Anakin also gets a speeder and they chase the bounty hunter Zam through Coruscant and eventually makes it to the ground, where Anakin runs after Zam. Force speed! Caught. There's also another time where it would come in very useful. It's towards the climax, so I'm not going to give it away, but it just would have ended things really quick. And I was wrong. It does show up again, and I'll talk about it when I get to the Clone Wars. Now, you might be wondering why Ray Park hasn't come back, and that's the slight spoiler I have for Phantom Menace. Obi-Wan defeats him, and so Darth Sidious has to get a new apprentice, Count Dooku, who formerly was a Jedi Master, and his Padawan was Qui-Gon. Christopher Lee brings a whole new level of gravitas to the Star Wars franchise, because he's such an iconic actor and person. James Bond was based off of him. One of the negatives I have are the duels in this, simply because it's pretty obvious when they switch out Christopher Lee for his stunt double. Lucas doesn't sit back and show the action nearly as much as he did in Phantom Menace. There's more close-up shots to kind of hide the fact that it is a stunt double for most of the lightsaber battles with Count Dooku. But with that, they also show what the Force can do, and that Force lightning isn't just limited to the Emperor, which many thought to believe for a while because of Return of the Jedi, but that's down the road. But also, you learn about defense against Force lightning. It also kind of makes you wonder why, well, okay, I won't go down that line, because it's something I would talk about in Return of the Jedi, which we're a few movies away. But it is really cool to see the expansion on the Force. It's not just what it is. It just still kind of bothers me that Force speed isn't utilized, because it would make things a lot easier for the Jedi. And maybe that's why it's not utilized, because what ends up taking years probably wouldn't have taken years if they just used Force speed. I mean, Jedi would practically be invincible if they used it more often. And now that I think of it, maybe it's not used nearly as often because it's such a drain on the Jedi? I don't know. I only think that because part of the climax, there's another lightsaber duel. I don't want to give it away, but it's between two masters, and the one master is clearly drained after this lightsaber battle. So Dooku is now Darth Sidious's apprentice. It's definitely hinted in this movie how and why, and with the new Star Wars stuff coming out, the latest thing has been the Tales of the Jedi. That is split between telling Ahsoka's story and Dooku's story before he switches sides. That's really interesting. But it's very heavily hinted that Dooku disagrees with the Jedi at some point in his career, and he just leaves the Order. And the Order largely doesn't know what happened to him until this movie. But more pieces to the mystery are found. For instance, Zam is hired by Jango Fett, who Obi-Wan tracks down and finds out that he's the host for this clone army that was set up by a Jedi Master that's long past Jedi Sifo Dyas. And given the title of the movie, you can imagine that the clones attack at some point. And I'm going to leave it there. I enjoyed this movie when it first came out. I still enjoy the movie today. I definitely see the problems that people have with it, but I explained my view on some of them already, and I don't know why people see this as the weaker of the three films. And if anything, I would think Phantom Menace is the weaker of the three films. This one picks up the action, it really advances the story, it broadens Force capabilities, and yeah, the dialogue is cringy, especially the love story, but there are other really good dynamic relationships in here. Some of them are adversarial, like Obi-Wan and Jango. That's a great action sequence they have. The adversarial conflict that he has with Dooku. The companionship that Obi-Wan and Anakin have. Very well done. I think largely because my younger self at one point didn't really think for myself, and I kind of agreed with all the negatives that were said about the prequels. But after growing up and actually thinking for myself and watching it and coming to my own conclusions, I still really enjoy this movie. Those are my thoughts on Star Wars Episode 2 Attack of the Clones. Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. Thank you for watching, and live your imagination.